Just a second, sorry. Okay, so welcome to CORE. Welcome to the interim. I know that many of us have been working on various drafts and various discussions during the week, so this is probably not the only CORE-related meeting that you have been having. Your chairs today, as usual, are Marco Tiloca and me, Jaime Jimenez. I didn't get any minute takers to volunteer before. Maybe I will give it another try now. So please, if you would like to volunteer, even if it is partially, anything really, that will help the discussion. I would expect a lot of discussion today, so it would be really nice to have good minutes of the meeting. It is recording anyways, but
I can help until I leave.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to point out that in 1 hour there's another working group meeting starting.
All right, so we'll try to be quick about it. Well, I mean, we will make do with the current minutes, and anyway, it's recording, so it's recorded, so that's enough. So on the NoteWell, I just need to remind you that the NoteWell applies for IPR and for the working group processes and the general code of conduct. But in general, I mean, as far as conduct goes, I guess, try to be nice. We kind of know each other anyway, so should be fine. Few updates. Well, first, you see here the Core EMD that I'm hopefully sharing. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it seems to be the way to go in the IETF now, so we will probably replace Etherpad. It has a lot of nice features. You can see the output of the markdown in a nice format. Allows for plant UML and other diagrams that I'm not going to do right now. So very convenient. If you don't need an account, this is currently free access, but eventually you may want to have a data tracker account. On the core updates, we just got at least these two RFC2Bs on the SendML Edge and the more units RFC. So OAuth 48 is done pretty much. I think one of them was waiting for Mojan's, one of the authors, feedback. And the other one is on the area director table. That will be Barry, and he's not in the call right now, but I mean, things are moving forward on these two. Well, from our point of view, they're done, right? Then Oscar GroupCom. So I think Marco submitted a new version yesterday or today. So it might be time to do work. Yes, sorry.
Yesterday.
Yes. Yesterday. So it might be time to do working group last call. So might be a good time to start looking into it, hopefully. I guess 2 or 3 weeks. Is there any urgency, by the way? Can we do 3? What, Marco?
No particular urgency. It was good to have feedback already before IETF 108.
Yep. Okay. Anyway, we can go into those details later on. And then Yanni just forwarded me like a few seconds ago on the Jabber the latest version of the dev URN with the updates for the working group last call. And there he says that there's no, well, you can see it in the chat. Yeah, and that he will do another update today. That's the current variant, basically. So we will probably do also wrap up this draft. And that's so much for as far as updates, high-level updates that I have right now, that we have right now for core. So we can get into the actual meeting discussion. And I think that will be now Christian, right? I'll tell you something that I missed and forgot. Then go ahead.
Okay. I'm just pasting the two, so I don't really have much kind of slide-ish things to go with this. I'd like to just give you a brief update on where we are with resource directory, and I have to apologize. I wanted to have this in a much better state by today, but I just didn't manage and hacked up a few things
So
before this
just a
meeting.
second question. Then would you like me to keep sharing the screen, or do you want me to stop?
I mean, you can either could you basically follow the link that I'm that I'm pasting there? So let me just update this. So with that fragment identifier, that would get us to basically what has happened so far in resource directory, which is basically running through the comments that we got from the feedback. This is from the station this is currently in. So that's area director review and also the other all of the other areas input. Most of this is really editorial. I mean, there was boilerplate text that was wrong. There was things about the IANA registrations that could be improved. So really the kind of the small stuff is represented in here. Are you? Yeah, okay. In here. The most invasive changes probably which I just did a few minutes ago, replacing kind of consistently referring to the thing as the RD as opposed to RD sometimes, and sometimes resource directory capitalized, not capitalized. So this is kind of consistent now. The larger chunk of things that's kind of on my desk right now is the next link. If you could follow that as well, which is processing what the feedback was on the security consideration. So my view of the development of the security considerations was that we didn't have much initially, and then with each round of feedback, there got in cases of you should consider this, you should consider that, and describe how is this done, how is that done, and rather than take a step back and look at what we actually want to say, we fixed things as we got along. And in the April 16th interim, I think it was April, yeah, we had a talk about this, and my takeaway from that was that we should rather leave those things to the application and say more about how does an application arrive at a decision of what to protect, as opposed to you must protect this and this and that, and then everything will be safe, which it won't be because your application requirements will be different. So what I've started to sketch up was, so this is in a pull request. What you're seeing here is the rendered version of that. It's an updated version of the security policies, which I'll hope to finish today or tomorrow, but this shows the general direction. That is to say, what are the things that can be in a resource directory that you may want to protect, and what do you have? What do you need to consider when you do that? So one thing, basically, the four big topics are: you may or may not want to protect the endpoint name, in which case, if you're going by certificates, then you would probably have that in the common name. But that's one very particular example, and we are not giving normative. We don't specify how this is done, but just give guidance of you will have to find some way to pick that information out of there if you want to protect that. If you want to protect, on the other hand, what is in the resource links. That is, for example, if you advertise firmware update servers and you don't want your clients to just ping everyone who claims to have a firmware server, then the claims that would be in there would look quite different. If you could scroll down a page or so. The section on link confidentiality is kind of very, very incomplete, as is the rest, but basically that will say if you post anything to the resource directory that is not what you advertise in your well-known core anyway, then think twice before you do that. And on the other hand, if you're in a situation where things like that happen, then it will be up to the resource directory to authenticate the lookup clients as well. If everything in there is intended to be public anyway, there's no need to authenticate lookup requests. And in the end, all those things could be combined, and different sectors of a resource directory might have different policies. So I think this can largely replace the section 7 that used to be there with kind of taking in snippets of that which are still relevant, and would then also slim down a bit the security consideration section, just because it will become more of an, if anything of what you put in there is supposed to be protected, then there needs to be agreement between the registrants and the resource directory on that, and not so much this and that needs to be protected, because we are already describing applications that do not protect those things. Sorry. Because it's not relevant to them. So that's it from, I think that's it as far as updates to the resource directory are concerned. Yeah, let me just briefly go through the issues that we're having in there. So there's 2 or 3 more that are still pending on my list. Yeah. Brief moment, please. Yeah, so there's one concern that that came up that we might want to talk about briefly in this group here. That is that a resource directory, if it doesn't do source authentication or client liveness authentication, if it doesn't ensure client liveness, then it could be used to read data from devices on a local network, which is something that is generally avoided. So
is that something I can share on the issue tracker, by the way?
Yeah, that's. I'll just put the link in there. Yep. Here we go. 230 issues we've already been through. So yeah, it's been a while here.
Actually, it's this one, right?
So this will mean that there will be a round trip of something like basically an echo verification of, is this client really alive, which makes the simple registration not as simple anymore as it used to be. It's still simpler than a full registration, but not that simple anymore. Any ideas on whether that still justifies having a simple registration? If I had a pen, I'd drop it now to verify that it could be heard. Could I barely understood you. I don't know about the others.
I couldn't either. David, I'm wondering, your video is on? That could be creating some high bandwidth. Not that we don't want to see your face, but if you could close the video. Well, never mind. Sorry, Carsten, can you repeat, please?
I try. This
Now we lost you, Karsten.
Carsten, could you write it on the chat or on the minutes?
And Marco, you're the host. If you could be so kind to mute David. I don't think he can hear us. And
He's muted now.
Yeah, and I don't want to be rude, but I'm thinking that probably the video streaming is what is causing a bit of latency. I think he's not awake. He's on.
Doesn't seem like I stopped the video
That's
streaming.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was me.
No problem. But then, Carsten, please go ahead. We cannot hear you, Carsten.
He wrote in the chat.
Okay, so he will be restarting the call. So, Christian, you want to continue in the meanwhile? I hear a lot of echo. I don't know if I'm the only one.
The audio is horrible on this side.
I could hear you well, Thomas.
Same here.
Oh, yes. Now, both Marco and Francesca are very good. But Jaime, well, Carsten, not even mentioning him, but yeah, tragic.
So I don't know whether Carsten is, whether you're typing somewhere or not, but basically I'll take this as, okay, yeah, we still want simple registration, even if it means that there needs to be an echo round trip to verify client aliveness. That's fine with me as long as there's, yeah. So I think this big point about what do we want to say about how authentication is done for the resource directory leads us to the, I mean, on one hand, I'd like to have a bit of feedback of whether this is actually the direction the working group wants this development to have in, because I'm not working with much here, so I'm just trying to get a direction that will get this on, and I don't know whether that's right or wrong. And I think that discussion will also lead us to the next point of how will those details then be done, which is the next item on the agenda anyway.
Well, maybe we can continue with the next item and just start the discussion on authorization. At least I haven't been lately reading this issue, so I don't really have an opinion right now. It's reasonable, I mean, obviously, but I don't have more details.
So just on the procedural side, what I will do is basically finish this pull request, we'll send out a mail to the list for a day or two whether anyone wants to put something in right in there, and otherwise make this a new draft version, ask around on the list again, and claim that this is addressing the reviewers' comments as based on that.
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good to me. You agree, Marco, by the way?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Then next item on the agenda, the discussion on authorization. I guess I can stop sharing here and allow Klaus, right, to start sharing again. Klaus?
So back in February, I think we had this side meeting where we looked a bit into how to do authorization in resource directories. And now, if I got Christian right, he rewrote that section about security policies. I haven't seen that yet, and I also didn't, unfortunately, have any time to prepare much for this interim. So I haven't done any updates since that February meeting. So please discuss.
Could you guys share some notes from that meeting? By the way, I don't think I was present. I don't know if everybody else was. Or even if you could just summarize high level all the points that were touched.
So basically in February, the resource directory draft had a sentence that basically said, if you need authorization, then please use ACE. And what we did in that side meeting was try to figure out how the generic flow would be if you use ACE. I have the notes somewhere on my computer. I didn't find any online. Maybe we used Etherpad, I don't remember. But the notes are not very plenty.
Well, that's not a lot to work with right now. I don't know if any other participants on that meeting could share the minutes or high-level discussion topics for the rest of us in this meeting. Klaus, who was in that meeting, by the way? It was, yeah. Who?
I was there.
One could you
I
share the
didn't
notes,
take
maybe? Okay.
I didn't take minutes myself, so I don't have them. But it was essentially an early exploration how ACE could be used, in fact, with no real conclusion that I could remember. So maybe we can continue the exploration here.
Yes. Well, so in practice, when we have been trying to use a resource directory and ACE, what we have found out is that ACE is a bit requires a lot of private know-how in order to get started, and we were just wondering if it would be simplified in some fashion to have just like when we have the simple registration in RD, maybe something else could be done also for ACE in order to, I don't know what it is, if it is having the resource directory as a authorization server and just having one single entity, or whether that's better or not. But I was hoping to have that kind of discussion today here now.
Maybe I can contribute a bit to that. So one point we talked about at that meeting, if I remember correctly, was that at some point in time the client, so the registrant and the lookup client are both ACE clients here. The resource directory is the resource server, and there's an authorization server that may be co-hosted with the resource directory, but in general will not be. And what we did talk a bit about was that there will probably be, so there's two ways a registration can happen. Either the registrant already knows which credentials it needs to get from the which token it needs to get from the authorization server in order to do the registration. But what is, I think, the more likely situation is that the registrant will try to perform the registration and will fail with your credentials are not good enough forbidden message. That will then redirect it to the to the authorization server, from where it will be able to get its credentials or not if it's not authorized to. And combining that with what I've been starting on the topic of the various ways a resource directory can define its policies, I think this is the more realistic scenario, because the client may not know whether the resource directory will limit it based on the links it's trying to put in there, or based on its endpoint name, or what's or not. But when it tries to do the registration, then the resource directory will not, you are trying to do this, but you need to be, depending on the setup, authorized to use the name EP equals that name in the sector D equals that sector, or you might need to be authorized to publish links that indicate where a firmware update server is. and that information can be expressed in a scope, which is something that the resource directory and the authentication server need to agree on. But both need to understand what does this particular scope mean. And then the registrant can go to the authentication server and tell, please give me a token that's good for this scope, and then it will either get that or not.
Are we talking about just authorization for registration? Or are we talking about authorization for both registration and lookup?
In lookup, this can behave the same way. So if the client performs a lookup, then it will probably hit a 401 on the first lookup it does, and then go to the authorization server and get a token that's good for that particular lookup, provided lookups need authentication.
I think the important observation here is that the resource directory is agnostic with respect to the onboarding process that you have. We are not trying to impose a specific onboarding process here. The onboarding process has to come from somewhere else. And the resource directory is just an application that helps in disseminating information that is useful in that process. And of course, I have no idea if anybody heard me.
We did. I was just trying to figure out what onboarding means in particular in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting question. There are different ways for setting up system components, finding each other, and so on. And we are not trying to prescribe a single way for the components to find each other and obtain authorizations to work with each other, and so on. We are just trying to provide one component that can be used in such a process.
Karsten, especially for the registration case, do you think AIF may help with one more AIF case to define?
Yeah, I'm not sure we even need another case because we are essentially posting to a certain well-known resource and should be describable by AIF. The more interesting question is who can actually give that authorization in such a way that the resource directory listens to it. But that's again outside the scope of the resource directory document.
Mm-hmm. I agree that AIF should be able to do this without any special casing. We might need to have a way to include query parameters in an AIF, but then again, whether the scope is to do posts on the directory resource or to do any operation on the registration resource, I don't care too much, and that's something basically the resource directory and the authorization server need to agree on, and nothing more. And possibly the registrant if it wants to preemptively get the authorization, but it doesn't need to.
Do you need to think about the dynamic points that are created by the resource directory for each endpoint that can be updated in that direction?
Those would be the registration resources. So I think that so basically whoever is allowed to post to say /rd EP equals foo would also be allowed to put and delete /registration /whatever it picks for foo, and either of those can be used to describe the set of permissions that is basically shared between them.
Okay, that does make sense.
I'm thinking in the case of Lightweight M2M, for example, and we have here in the call David and Thomas and others that have been working on the standard. There is no specific authorization required for registration, and as far as I know, there is no lookup even present. I wonder if there is some platform out there using RD and ACE already that we could take as an example. Because as Carsten said, we are just building components, but without having the whole picture is a bit hard, at least for me, to think on how to optimize things.
What sort of detail are you
Was
looking
the
for?
audio, the audio okay, by the way? Or, oh yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Yes, we heard everyone in the room.
Okay, sorry.
What sort of thing are you looking at? I mean, I can set up an authorization server and maybe even a resource directory. I think my resource directory right now is screwed up very badly. They could do this. I mean, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for someone using registration and lookup, in which two different parties do the registration and lookup, so authorization is required. So in the Lightweight M2M sense, and please, David or Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, when Lightweight M2M, so when an endpoint registers on what is called the Lightweight M2M server, which is running a resource directory, there is no authorization needed, because there is some either pre-shared key or some sync credentials already, and it is a trusted component. And then there is no expectation of other Lightweight M2M servers or other Lightweight M2M entities querying a different Lightweight M2M server. So there is no lookup function from the IoT side point of view. There is, of course, the application server and other things on the back end, and they have lookup and they can search in a database, but that's a different thing. Did I explain it correctly, by the way, David? Please jump in anytime.
No, that's perfectly correct. Lightweight M2M deals only with the interface between the endpoints, the devices, and what we call the Lightweight M2M server, which is actually the manager of these devices. And everything that is lookup and so on from other entities is out of the scope.
So to understand this, that Lightweight M2M server would have configured knowledge of which credentials which device has, and then accept or reject registration based on the endpoint name when it comes, and accept it only when it comes from the device that matches that endpoint name.
This is the case for the Palion, the ARM product. Yes. In the sense that the authorization is done as a DTLS tunnel to the server with pre-shared keys or certificates that have been installed in the device at manufacturing time.
Yeah, the Lightweight M2M server is already pre-provisioned with the security credential of the endpoints that will connect to it.
So in a sense, it's already doing what we're describing here. It just takes a few shortcuts because they're not needed, because it's all integrated in one thing.
Yeah.
So then it's it's one of the conclusions in the call that actually everything is fine, and the RD and ACE and authorization is not a problem anymore, or? People seem a bit more quiet than usual. I don't know if it is the summer feeling, vacation coming.
Christian, do you plan any way to have in the next version text covering how ACE can be used?
I wouldn't really put text about concrete ACE usage in there because it will. So in the pull request that I showed before, I do have kind of some examples on a very high level where I do mention ACE in the sense that this will basically information about this will end up in the scope of what of the ACE token, but no details, because I mean the details will depend on the application, and we can certainly have something like example applications somewhere, but for example, I mean, those will always be suitable only for that particular case, and more like, yeah, I mean, examples and nothing prescriptive.
I agree with that way. Like I wasn't suggesting that, or I don't think Marco was suggesting that either directly.
We shouldn't be prescriptive, in fact, so not really big details. I just remember from an early discussion with Alexi that he was suggesting to have, something more than just, if you want access control, do something.
Yeah, but again, the point here is that the resource directory is agnostic. So if you want to have something like SNMP version 3, you have to have a security play, because there is no way that nobody else is going to define that for you. But this is not SNMP v3. This is a component in a space where people already are building security solutions, and whatever they are providing will be able to provide the authorization information for the resource directory.
Maybe just to clarify, actually, like the scope of the interim was not to actually make more changes to the resource directory draft, but rather back some weeks ago, it was found out, or when we were having a meeting, we discussed that the usage of ACE in the context of RD was maybe a bit complicated. And we were wondering if it would be worth, so this interim was about that, about how to simplify the usage of ACE for RD, not to make changes to RD.
Okay.
As far as I know.
Good. So the one thing that we haven't really discussed in ACE is how to handle dynamic resources. So AIF can describe static resources, but if there is some process that creates resources on someone's behalf, then you would have to define how the authorization that was initially expressed in terms of access to the resource that creates these dynamic resources would confer or continue to the dynamically created resources. And mapping ACE plus AIF to the resource directory probably would need this very tiny piece of glue, essentially saying, if you created it, you have it, it's yours.
So basically that every statement about a resource is transitive over location links from there.
Yes. I mean, still, applications can do it differently, but this is a great way to do the default authorization for the resource directory.
The other issue that may need to be discussed is, what does the resource directory do when the authorization expires?
The trivial thing to happen would be that no further updates can come in, and after the end of the lifetime, the resource goes away.
Right, but that implies very long-lived authorization tokens.
Well, generally, that's a good point. The lifetime of the dynamically created resource should not be longer than the lifetime of the authorization for dynamically creating it.
I couldn't catch that. Can you repeat, please?
The lifetime of a dynamically created resource cannot be longer than the lifetime of the authorization that was used for creating it.
So a client should ask for an updated access token well in advance before it expires.
Yes, and then it can renew the registration.
Yeah, but go ahead, Christian.
And if the client were to request a lifetime longer than what it can do, it would be for one rejected and be redirected to the authorization server again to get a longer token.
I think the resource directory can already reduce the lifetime that was requested.
No, not really.
Am I right?
I think not, because I wouldn't know how it would communicate that back to the client.
Okay.
So if I understand you correctly, Carsten, you don't leave any safe legal margin between a token expiration and the deletion of the resource for which an updated token is needed, right?
Yeah, so the client should be aware that is using some authorization that is time limited.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that the client is doing based on that authorization will have to inherit that time limit, both on the server side and on the client side. So the client should know that it needs to re-register before that authorization actually ends.
Yeah.
And not to include any larger lifetimes because that would be rejected.
Yeah, that's the part that worries me. But if we actually are rejecting authorizations, dynamic resources that last longer than the authorizations for creating them, then the client will have to figure that in.
I mean, it's all not keeping us from using the co-op problem information to also say that you either get a longer token or just decrease your lifetime. We can still do that without any change to RD because it's just another thing that comes into play.
Response from ACE does tell you when the token expires.
Yeah, but the RD wouldn't tell you that it's rejecting your your update because it has a too long lifetime.
I agree that the problem draft would help with that.
These points seem general enough to be included in the draft anyway, even abstracting from ACE, right?
Yeah, I was trying to say this in the most general way possible, not necessarily limited to ACE.
Right. So it's good considerations to have anyway, I think. And we know what that means if exactly ACE is used.
Yep.
Any other big complication in case from possibly using ACE that anyone is worried?
Well, just to go back a second. So in the lightweight M2M case, basically we would say that the lifetime of the key is infinite, right?
I'm no expert in live end-to-end, but the way it is now, as far as I remember, it's an old version of the registration interface of the resource directory, in which you include the lifetime as a parameter during the registration.
Yeah, and that didn't change.
Yeah.
Right, but the authorization lifetime on the key is never is infinite.
I don't remember. As far as I know, it sounds like yes, but I'm not sure. Maybe the latest version of live end has changed.
So which key are we talking about? Is it the location that is returned by the resource directory, or the key at the TTLS or TLS level?
Whatever key you're using for the purposes of authorization.
Okay,
Which
so
I assume is the TLS key.
Okay, so this one are dealt with through a different mechanism. So basically, there is a specific lightweight end-to-end server, the Bootstrap server, who is in charge of updating and modifying the keys through special operation on the endpoint. But it's not part of the. It's in the whole lightweight end-to-end system, not on the specific part of the registration to the lightweight end-to-end server. This is a separated mechanism.
So are there any lifetimes there?
Well, there's the lifetime that the implementer decide to use. There is no requirements expressed in the lightweight end-to-end specification, only guidelines and advices.
Okay.
There are the means to update the keys and change them and update them, but there is no specific requirements on what you should do.
Right. The question is, do the participants in the protocol know what the lifetime is going to be in the end? Is that information being exchanged, or is it some system configuration that you just have to know?
No, there's nothing at the protocol level, I would say, that indicate that. Just that maybe when, for instance, in our case, when we want to make a key update, we basically invalidate the previous key at the lightweight end-to-end server level. So when the device cannot receive an unauthorized answer from the server because the key is using are not up to date, it will then contact the Bootstrap server, and the Bootstrap server will provide him with the updated keys. But it's not part of the information that is in exchange between the server and the client. Between the device and the lightweight end-to-end server.
Okay, so that sounds like the answer to Jim's question is yes.
I mean, I guess the lifetime is a priori infinite, unless the Bootstrap server does something or decides, due to the implementation characteristics, to change it. But what I'm thinking is that if one company has one lightweight end-to-end server and another has another lightweight end-to-end server, and they are bound to the first one's Bootstrap server, I'm not so sure how the second one can actually change the keys in that case. How do you signal that the keys have expired? I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's no mean except by refusing the connection, denying the connection. So yeah, I used to say that the owner of the Bootstrap server is the owner of the devices, because the Bootstrap server can manage all the security of the devices.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I was dropping out for so long. So where are we writing up what we are discussing? Is there going to be a draft about this? Or?
No, there's just the minutes. The idea, I mean, one of the potential ideas with this session, we found out that it was necessary to simplify ACE for some RD use case. Somebody could take a stab at doing some draft or something like that, but I'm not so sure anymore. From at least from this meeting, I don't know what you guys think.
So I think a good step here would be to have basically have some text, possibly document, that just describes an example setup of how a resource directory with an authorization server and all those other components could play together, like an example setup. And I think I could even fit that in, at least preliminarily, in the resource directory extensions, in the sense of, yeah, this is one of those ways how all those things could be combined.
I think it will be useful from the informational point of view, but what I'm getting at is that I'm not so sure that there is an actual requirement anymore for other purposes than just information.
So one other approach would be to actually write something into the IETF document.
That would make sense as well, yeah. Possibly even more.
So I will need to switch to a different meeting in 2 minutes. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the minutes of this meeting, and I'll try to find out what potential addition to the IETF document we could create from this.
Thank you. We'll continue. I guess we can continue a bit longer. The rest of us.
Sure.
Thank you,
See
Carsten.
you later. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao. So maybe, I don't know if you, Klaus, if you have any input, because I remember we have had discussions on RD and OAuth and usability. And, you know, this could be a good time to say something if you want to. Because we have all these other people in the, you know, from the lab end-to-end point of view and other ACE experts and so on.
I don't know. So the original idea of that site meeting a long time ago was to take the components that we develop in our working groups and just put them together once to see if they can actually combine, as we always say. We build the components and then let other people combine them. But maybe there are some gaps, maybe there are some clarifications needed, and so on. So doing this non very IETF-y activity of combining components seemed like a useful thing to do. And now I think we have identified some areas where maybe, as was said, maybe something could be clarified in AIF or so. And so it seems we have a good way forward. Mission accomplished.
Does it make any sense to spend an hour or two during the week of the hackathon to attempt this, or do you think it's too early for that?
In theory, everything that needs to be implemented should be there, right? So you would do the first step of discovering your resource directory as described in the RD draft. Then you would probably try to do a registration. You would fail because you don't have the authorizations, and then you get bounced to an authorization server. For that, we should have a draft that says how this redirect works and so on. So in theory, all the components should be there, and it should be easy to put them together in a hackathon also.
Half of the redirect already exists. The other half doesn't, because I could never convince anybody that it was important. So as part of the authorization fail from the resource server, you get told what AS to go talk to. But unfortunately, you still don't get told, ask for this scope.
Why not?
So because no one ever believed me that it should be there. Which is because the scope should be completely agnostic in this case to the client. It should not have to try to figure out what the scope is.
So the client may know, but it may just also not.
Right. Because, at that point, it's like, well, if I talk to two different resource directories and they have a different idea of how the scope looks, I have to figure out which one is which one I'm using.
I can also imagine that things get into the territory of not entirely clear when it comes to commissioning tools versus the devices registering themselves. I guess the commissioning tool needs to be authorized to register the resources of some device. Where does the commissioning tool get its authorization from?
Also from the authorization server. So if the commissioning tool does not know the structure of the scopes, it will just be upgrading its token time and again and again and again for every registration it does. If of course the commissioning tool gets a bit more knowledge about how those things look like, it might ask the authorization server for a token that actually represents all its might, and thus be good for everything that it can do.
Yeah, so again, in theory, all the components should be there. But I think it would be nice to just see it in practice, where someone has put all these components together for some maybe artificial scenario.
So does anyone have both a resource directory implementation and an ACE implementation other than Jim? Because I have the ACE implementation on my to-do list for probably 2 years now, and didn't manage yet. So I won't.
Well,
as of now, I won't be much help in a hackathon.
Well, but in theory, you could actually use your resource directory implementation with my ACE implementation.
I would still need to glue those together in the sense of, I mean, I could use your AS, but my RD currently needs kind of pre-configured, hard-coded OSCORE keys.
Right, you'd have to modify your RD to be able to accept the ACE protocol, but you wouldn't actually need to write an authorization server.
Yes, that I think I can skip.
Well, as far as language Interim goes, we have implementation, but for this exercise, it's only the registration interface, which is pretty useless, I guess. I don't know if anyone from OMA would be interested in this exercise, maybe as an extension to the existing language Interim. I don't know if they would like to use it, no idea.
My hunch would be that if a client tries to register with a with a lightweight M2M server, that would be, then basically that 401 could tell it to please talk Bootstrap server protocol to that Bootstrap server.
Actually, that could be useful to redirect to another Bootstrap server in the same way. Instead of just deny the connection. That could be better. Yeah. Does anyone know how OCF does it, by the way? I think they had an implementation too. I'm thinking more like on the product side.
No idea.
Somebody send a piece of email to Michael.
Yeah, we can. The chairs can do that. We can do that and ask.
And just a question about the lightweight M2M setup. Can a lightweight M2M server accept key material from different Bootstrap servers? So could my device that has its Bootstrap server, and we already heard that's basically the owner of the device, go to some lightweight M2M server and say, hey, here I am, and I know you won't accept my credentials, but here's my Bootstrap server. Ask him, and if you take it, basically, if you accept that Bootstrap server, you might accept my credentials as well.
Oh, it's not the use case and the design philosophy of lightweight M2M.
Okay, so is it always one Bootstrap server and one?
Well, actually, the interaction between the various servers, lightweight M2M server and Bootstrap server, is not defined in lightweight M2M specification. And well, it's the philosophy is more centralized than that. It's a device management protocol, so meaning that what we call the lightweight M2M server is actually a kind of resource directory and a co-op client. And it's there to manage, to configure and manage the devices, which are co-op servers, even if we call them lightweight M2M clients. So basically, all the devices are known by the various servers, and it's the Bootstrap server that will, the devices, when they first boot, they will contact the Bootstrap server. The Bootstrap server will configure them with the information on how to connect to the lightweight M2M servers with the URI and the credential. And then the devices will connect to the lightweight M2M server, will register to them using a kind of resource directory format. And then the lightweight M2M server will perform various co-op method on the device resources to configure them.
So basically, that is saying that at the time a device would connect to a lightweight M2M server, its Bootstrap server will already have some pre-existing chat with that server because it configured it to use that server. So that Bootstrap server will, in some out-of-scope way, already have talked to the actual server.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, do we have any other discussion for RD and authorization? I must confess, I read draft once, but I don't remember much about it. I don't.
And it changed yesterday, so there are some new.
Okay. It's very short.
Just getting to a point you mentioned before, Christian, I think it can be useful anyway to have informational content in the RD extensions document to give an example of workflow, but of course it's informational.
Yeah, but if that's all in, I'll look through the cases. Possibly there is, if we put text into the AIF appendix, there's a way to just reference that. So like, and
Right.
if you have authorization involved there, look over there.
Okay.
One question I have actually. Oh, sorry.
In the long run, we may actually want to turn that into an informational document out of the ACE working group, just to give some. This is how you do this. This is how you do certain types of things. But I think for now it can stay where it is.
Sorry, one question. So AIF, basically the gist of it is to allow the different methods to each resource on a co-op server. Is that it?
So like a simple form of writing ACLs for URIs.
At some level, we already do that actually in LiveWitM2M. That's interesting. They already do that. But they do these read, write, execute operations. It's more like mapping to CRUD operations, but essentially it's similar.
Read, write, execute, get, put, post. What's the difference?
Exactly. Does that apply also to patch and fetch and all the methods?
It's becoming a bit more generic now. So what you mentioned is the REST case that was the only case till yesterday. Now it's one of the possible cases as an instance of a template that you can use to describe more generally what to do even in terms of roles or on a resource not necessarily identified by a URI. And in fact, we are creating a second instance to cover the group com documents in ACE.
Okay. So we have still some minutes. I'm wondering, we can still continue on the RD topic since we are, or if you guys have any other items you want to raise. Personally, for instance, I'm curious to know how is the RD extensions going. I haven't followed it recently. I'm seeing that there is not many updates though, but
not much activity. Basically just sitting there waiting for other use cases to come up or anyone to show. So basically, any particular interest in something to develop further. So I think to me the single point that would be worth really expanding here, but that depends on the direction Lightweight M2M would like to take, is to try to align the proxying mechanism with Lightweight M2M. So if in Lightweight M2M anything were to come up in the direction of allowing one device to access another one via the server, then that I think could be expressed pretty straightforwardly through the proxy, through the reverse proxy thingy.
actually, we had an interesting discussion yesterday with, I think Alan Soloway was present, but we were a bunch of us. And I mean, in Lightweight M2M, as far as I also understand, there is no actual proxies. It's always one Lightweight M2M server to one Lightweight M2M client and vice versa. And there is no expectation on, even though every endpoint has a co-op client and server, and some of them are on the same subnet, there is no expectation of direct communication between two Lightweight M2M endpoints.
I'm not so much talking about direct communication. So the way Lightweight M2M routes communication is always through the Lightweight M2M server, which is fine. But thing is, you can't express. David, I think you mentioned that there's kind of this IoT side, and then there's the whole backend, and there's just, as far as I understand, currently no way for the IoT side to interact with other things on the IoT side. Now, if
No,
that
that's
ever
not.
becomes relevant, then I think it can be expressed by this proxy extension. If it doesn't become relevant, there's not much point to it.
Maybe, David, you have a more day-to-day knowledge of Lightweight M2M requirements, gathering process, and so on.
Yeah, currently the Lightweight M2M, we are finishing the version 1.2 of the enabler. Then there will be a requirement phase that will start, I guess, in September, to gather the requirements from the various companies that are involved in the OMA regarding Lightweight M2M. But judging from the past, this kind of requirement that one IoT device would like to access resources present on another IoT device authorized by the Lightweight M2M server has not come up yet. So I don't think, well, I don't know if we'll be part of next version of Lightweight M2M, but currently no one has expressed this kind of requirements. As I said, the use cases are very centric. It's really a device management, mainly by network operators of the devices that are connected to their network.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'm realizing that even if you wanted to, if that was expressed, then the first thing to do would be to add a lookup possibility, right? Because how the device find the other device he wants to contact, anyways.
Yeah, from what I've known of the current draft of the resource directory, it would be the way to go, yes.
Yes, and at that point in time, you would need to have a base address that you can put in there, because right now those things don't have base addresses. And then you can't use the ephemeral port anymore, and then you'll need something proxy-like-ish.
Yeah, exactly. But the way I see it, Lightweight M2M is more gathering various standards, mainly IETF RFCs, and explaining how to put them together, more than defining its own process and so on. So everyone at the OMA is very keen on relying on published RFCs, rather than reinventing the wheel and defining new stuff. So don't worry, if the need arises, the resource directory will be the main provider for the future.
So any other items to be raised now? When do we have the next interim? I don't remember right now.
This is the last one of this series.
Ah, all right.
So the next big thing will be IETF 108, last week of July.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we still have the minute, but I guess we, unless somebody has something else, we could close it already, the call. There is, oh yeah, on top of my head, there was this, as I said yesterday, there was this interesting discussion on DynLink and on the use of proxies with co-op. I think that could be maybe shared with a larger audience once the main participants are happy with the conclusions. So it might be that we have another ad hoc meeting coming, not a proper interim. So just just follow the mailing list; it will be sent there. And I think that's all I have. Marco, please, if you have something else as well.
I just mentioned that the new version of the VRM was submitted, so you wish for that at the beginning of the meeting. It happened.
Great. So we have a new version.
Yes. I'll have a look.
Some more homework, something else to check.
Sure.
In fact, actually, this dev URN will be the final. So at some point in OMA, you guys, because you guys are using URNs at some point, so you might want to have a look at this. don't copy paste the name of the draft on the chat. On the well, not on the on the minutes and on the chat. Well, if that is all, then I think we can call it a day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Ciao ciao.
Uh,
Bye.